This is not how I imagined my first day.
Okay, so this is Brent Friedman, guys. He's literally the single scriptwriter for Resident Evil 2's remake, or reimagining, whatever you want to call it. Everyone has their own philosophy on that one. He basically is the one that is responsible for all the story changes, the dramatic cinematography, and all of the extra dialogue and rewrites, etc. Like, for example, the Annette Birkin redemption scene, etc. All of these things he is single-handedly responsible for, so yeah, we've got him to thank for all of that, single-handedly. So yeah, welcome him, everybody.
Well, let me just say that it is accurate to say that I single-handedly wrote everything, but even to understand the process by which this game was brought to life, you have to kind of give a lot of credit to the developers and designers at Capcom, who kind of laid the groundwork and kind of had a schematic in mind for how they wanted to remake this game. And then kind of stepping even further back, to see the bigger picture of how it was ultimately produced, the number of people that were involved shooting all of the mocap, from the technical directors and the technicians and the people who were involved in just everything from the storyboards to ultimately the lighting effects that were brought on, not to mention all of the behind the scenes talent with regards to the actual roles, the director, the actors themselves. A lot goes into making the game that you see, and that you experience. So yes, I had an important role. But the truth is, all of those are hugely important roles. It's like a symphony. They all have to come into sync together at the exact same time with the same intention in order to deliver the experience that you guys have had with the game.
First off, I just want to say, by the way, not just from myself, but from the entire RE community, that thank you so much, honestly, for working on the entire project and reimagining the lore in a way that's got a lot more depth to it, a lot more seriousness. And honestly, all of us, and there's going to be many people who comment on this, are going to say how much we really appreciate the changes and the dramatic cinematography that you've added to the reimagining, rather than just making it another generic, say, RE5.
Well, I appreciate that. I know all of the team appreciates it as well. As you can imagine, when you're tinkering with something that's so beloved as the original RE2, any change you make is at great risk. The desire was to, of course, deliver something that the existing fan base still loved, but that was fresh and new enough where new fans could be brought into it as well. So it was really walking a tightrope the whole time in terms of how much do we change, how much do we keep exactly the same, trying to find that sweet spot where it was fresh but familiar at the same time.
And I completely agree with that. Honestly, I don't think people appreciate how much developers actually put into it. For example, even down to the artists who literally will talk to the directors and even, for example, the writers like yourself and say, hey, I suggest we do this texture or whatever change because it would make more sense with this specific element that you're trying to incorporate. For example, with the removal of the evolved liquors and things like that, because it made more sense, because later on when we explored Resident Evil's lore and they elaborated on liquors, it kind of like contradicted the original Resident Evil 2's explanation. And so this reimagined lore, like, a lot of people will have put thoughts like that because, as we all know, Capcom hired a huge amount of original and hardcore Resident Evil fans who understand all of the intricacies behind this, and many people must have pitched in a lot of ideas and talent beyond what their actual speciality is.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to, at one point in the development process, to fly back to Osaka in Japan, where Capcom's headquarters are, and spend about a week with the development team, kind of ironing out all of the narrative, making some big kind of decisions so that we had an understanding of kind of what the continuity of the story was going to be spread across the game, and how the two kind of A/B scenarios would interlink. And I'm sure we'll have a deeper discussion about that in a moment. But when I got back there, it was amazing to see how many people that were working on the team were just hardcore Resident Evil fans, and specifically with regards to Resident Evil 2. I mean, this was a game that was not at all, I can say, a money grab. It wasn't just a let's kind of churn this out and like make a little bit of extra coin. This was let's make a game for the fans by fans of the property. And that's a pretty unique experience in modern gaming culture, I think.
So on that subject specifically, because again, we all know that Capcom did hire a lot of literal fans to make the actual game. As an original fan, and we did discuss this before, that you've played the original games and you were a huge fanatic of them, what kind of direction did Capcom want you to go into, and what creative freedom did they allow you in the writing and scripting?
Well, great question. I tell people that I worked on this game for about 2.5 years. The first 6 months, which was actually, not the 2.5 years, there was not pure continuity there. And the initial effort was to remake the game much closer to the Resident Evil 1 remake, where it was really going to be a true kind of more remastering. And my job when I was originally hired was to really just kind of polish up the existing dialogue that was in the game. And what that really meant was make it feel more English, and I mean American. And so I was brought on to do that. And so my initial 6 months was just looking at literally a spreadsheet of all the dialogue that was in the existing game, and then trying to find ways to just kind of tweak it a little bit to make it sound less clunky or clumsy, without really changing the story or the structure or the length of any scenes at all. We went down that path, like I said, maybe about 6 months, until somebody at Capcom decided, you know what, this is not the direction we want to go. They put me on hold and said, we'll get back to you at some point. And I don't remember how long it was, but at some point they got back to me and said, we want to do something different. We want to do a more kind of a reimagining of the game, and we want to actually keep the same basic structure and the same characters and everything, but we want to take a little bit more liberties and give you a little bit more dramatic license to do more with the scenes. And the overriding idea they wanted to get into it was, let's see if we can make it feel more real. And I know why they wanted to do this was because that's what they were going to be delivering from a visual standpoint and from an audio standpoint. They were going for a realistic kind of immersive experience that dropped you into what felt like a very believable Raccoon City zombie apocalypse. And so to have kind of the dialogue be a little bit too kind of arch or campy or cheesy or over the top was going to pull you out of that experience. Whereas if I could ground some of the characters and make them feel more real, then it would keep you immersed in that experience. And, so they did. We can talk more specifically, and you can ask me about a couple specific scenes, but there were some scenes where they gave me, a lot of freedom, in fact, complete freedom to do whatever I thought was right dramatically.
Yeah, can we talk about one of those actually?
Sure.
The one I want to bring up specifically, and I'm sure you know the one, and it's the one in Claire's campaign with Annette Birkin and the Sherry scene. So that actually lasts for a while, to be honest, the entire storyline behind that. It actually does go on for about an hour's worth of gameplay if you're playing without speedrunning. And essentially you see it go from Annette being a sociopath at first, if you really want to put it down to psychology, and then she slowly becomes aware of her maternal instinct. She starts really regretting her choices. And in the original Resident Evil 2, like the chief Annette's basically just a villain. There's no empathetic situation with her. There's no sob story. There's no tragic scenario. There's no redemption. And in this version, you were given the creative freedom, of course, to make a lot of differences with specific characters, and the one we're going to talk about is Annette. And this one lasted a while, because at first we go from Annette being a sociopath to her wanting to cure her daughter, but then it goes beyond just curing her daughter, because honestly at the end of it, like, I really believe that she had you could just see it, not just from the dialogue but even the animations, that she was regretting her entire choices with working with Umbrella and her relationship with William, and she just kind of wished she probably would have just got out of there, bailed, ghosted, and tried to live a normal life with her daughter. And that was like a really beautiful difference from the original game, because there was like a way to connect to the character emotionally, to be honest, and that hit a lot of people. Like, I was actually almost teary at that scene, and I have a few friends, by the way, that actually did cry, full on cry at that scene. So about those creative differences, like, how much pressure did you feel about those, and how far did that go?
Well, first of all, it's very gratifying to feel that some fans, some players, were so connected to the story and the characters at that moment that they felt real strong emotions. If you remember, 10, 15 years ago or so, the gauntlet that was always thrown in game development was, can we make a game that would cause people to cry? Like, that just seemed impossible. Right. And it was this impossible goal for a long time. And now you get, games like The Last of Us and the original Walking Dead games for Telltale. And, now it's like, oh, yeah, of course you can do it, but to do it in a game like Resident Evil, where you're just not expecting it, then it feels even more gratifying. But to answer your question, the reason it was important to make the changes to Annette that we did goes back to that kind of fundamental directive, which was to make things more real. Well, real is not just making a real environment and having, great physics in the game, but it is having like real emotions in the game as well. There's a huge difference for me between a character like Chief Brian Irons and Annette. Chief Brian Irons is like a psychopath, not a sociopath. He's a psychopath. And I don't want to try and explain why he believes and feels all the things he does. That was kind of handed to me by existing lore. But I just tried to make him feel even scarier by making him feel just like a believably unhinged, powerful man, just corrupt to the core.
Like when he shoots at Claire to kidnap a child, for example.
Yeah, what I wanted to show was, this is a guy who knows how to get what he wants, and he is not scared to do whatever it takes. And when you introduce a character like that, then you're always on edge. Like, oh, what is this guy going to do? And the unspoken kind of aspect of that character was, well, what would he do to Sherry? Without actually kind of pushing him over into the category of being like a pedophile or anything. You really were uncertain, and I think that really helped make that little snippet of gameplay where you play as Sherry, like everything that you do with Chief Irons, and how Claire responds to him and whatnot, makes you just absolutely dread having to play as Sherry, because you just don't know what this psychopath is going to do to you. So he's a very different character than Annette, even though when you first meet them, they each could be, kind of deemed as equally deranged. I think for her, she's a woman who is, I saw her as a woman who is in a state of mourning or grief, meaning she is trying to live with the fact that she has been involved in making her husband a monster, not to mention involved in some degree of complicit, guilt around everything that's happening in this nightmare. So she is not necessarily a bad person. She's made bad choices, whereas Brian Irons is a bad person. He has no humanity left. I think she does. And when we meet her, she's just in a state of delirious kind of confusion and grief. And so she's not really paying attention to anything other than trying to put the genie back in the bottle, right? To redeem herself. And what she discovers in the course of the story is that, well, that can never happen. She can at least redeem herself in her daughter's eyes. And that's really what her whole arc becomes, is one of dawning awareness of how can she at least go out with her conscience intact.
That's exactly the reception I felt from it, is that basically she knew that she was on death's door, and essentially she knew she'd made so many bad decisions, but essentially she did have a moral compass still. And she was under a very tight situation because, of course, we know how aggressive and how much willing Umbrella is as a corporation and its management to just kill individuals at a whim. And she was just in a very, very difficult situation as a person, to be honest. In a reality, she's probably one of the more interesting characters. She's kind of like the Lucas now of Resident Evil 2, as in, they're a character that's morally ambiguous, to be honest, in various ways, which is really interesting because there's plenty of reasons to hate them, but there's also then redemption reasons to really feel an empathetic connection to them towards the end, and you really pulled that off well with Annette. And also, not just you, but of course, like you said before, we have to respect the development team, the mocap team, etc., and the animation team that got all of those emotions also portrayed so well. And that's why I wanted to bring up the Annette one, to be honest, because I honestly do think that Annette's Claire campaign, not the Leon, but the Claire campaign, is honestly the most impactful moment in all of RE2, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, again, great to hear. I also want to specifically give props to the actress who played Annette, Karen Strassman, who I actually have worked with on another project, and she's just a tremendous talent. And she brought that character to life. Took the words that were on the page and made it human and three-dimensional. So a lot of what you're reacting to is what she brought to it, not just the words.
Now, I don't want to talk about this too long. I want to talk about something that many fans wanted to ask, and I have also been curious about, right? Because there has obviously been a complicated love plot between Ada and Leon throughout the entire franchise of Resident Evil, and in no Resident Evil have they ever had any intimacy in reality other than, and some people consider this intimacy, but it really wasn't, and it was in the original Resident Evil 2, if you remember the resuscitation scene where Leon gives mouth-to-mouth to Ada, but you decided to have Ada kiss Leon. Now, the thing that I want to elaborate on here is that in the entire plot of Resident Evil 2, you've given Ada even more ambiguity than the original game, and what I mean by that is that she does still care for Leon, and you get the same vibe throughout all the other games, that she's a chaotic neutral character, but at the same time, to you as a writer, honestly, and many of the fans would appreciate, was that kiss legitimate? Or was it just part of her manipulation as her directive as a spy and an operative? Or a little bit of both?
Well, here's how I saw it. And I really think, this is one of those moments, and there are many in games and film and television, that is best left open to interpretation, because I think the ambiguity is what makes Ada interesting. I think that when you start kind of drawing lines and saying, here's certainly what you're supposed to think and feel, she becomes less interesting. But that being said, my interpretation of it was that she used that moment and that kiss to get him to do what she needed him to do. And I think that though her feelings for him, when he actually pulled it off, and why she couldn't shoot him, because in that moment, to do her job correctly, to be the spy that she actually is, she should have shot him. and just take in the thing.
And
But
then
she
later,
couldn't.
she also handed him the napalm launcher too.
Yeah. So I think that the kiss, ironically, was disingenuous, but I think that, she may have felt some things for him, but did what she had to in that moment to keep the case, to keep her mission alive. She did need him. Everything she said, I can't do this. My mission depends on you. Now, you have to understand too, and one of the things I'm most proud of is there's a lot of moments in the game where the dialogue is another character kind of compelling you to move forward and do something from a narrative standpoint, which is really kind of the equivalent of just an on-screen prompt: go get the G virus. but you're just wrapping kind of exposition or tutorial, in some sort of some drama. And in that case, she's basically, telling the player, you've got to go on this whole other mission, and giving it some sort of dramatic context. But from a character standpoint, like I said, I do believe she just did what she had to do to get him to move forward, knowing that she's a smart woman, she can sense he does have feelings for her, so she used those feelings to manipulate him. But when he succeeded and he actually brought that back, and he was willing to put his life on the line because he felt that she had feelings for him, her actions then speak louder than words. And the fact that she couldn't shoot him when she absolutely should have to be a good spy tells you that she really did care about him.
And then the napalm launcher that she handed him as well, which definitely went against her directive. I do not think she was authorized for that. I don't think so. Now, not to get too off topic here, because you did give a really good answer there, by the way. You basically covered everything. Here's something that's interesting, right? In the original interviews, and actually this went on for quite a while, you might be aware of it, they said that Resident Evil 1.5 did not influence Resident Evil 2 in any way, shape, or form. But when we came to play all of Resident Evil 2, we noticed quite a few 1.5 references. So was this something that was added later in, or was it a red herring to keep people surprised?
I actually don't have a lot of insight into that. What I do know is that a lot of the truth about the game and what's actually in the game and how it was going to work was being very carefully managed in terms of how the truth was slowly being revealed, because I think that they knew, and I say they, Capcom knew very astutely, that fans' expectations around this game were going to be out of control. And so they had to very, very carefully kind of craft the narrative of what this game actually is in the months leading up to its release. So I think it's entirely possible, although I cannot actually validate this, that certain things that might have been true were withheld in order to not have fans' expectations go wildly all over the place.
I think a lot of people already know that's the truth, but it's appreciated to, have it said by somebody from an authoritative position in the industry. It's very appreciated. Here's an interesting question as a writer, though. Because you wrote both campaigns completely, pretty much. Not completely, but you get my point almost entirely. Yeah. Which is your favorite campaign and why?
Well, yeah. That's you gave me the question that's always the hardest to answer, because you hate to pick one or the other, but I will. I prefer, if I were to play the game, just as a fan, if I hadn't worked on it at all, I would have wanted to play Claire A and Leon B. And because I feel that Claire's campaign is the most emotional. It's the most, it's not just because of Sherry, but also because I'm getting kind of the most emotional kind of understanding of what's going on and why this is happening. Whereas Ada and her story is more kind of connecting the dots. It's like filling in some gaps that I didn't get from Claire A. So I also just have and it sounds weird. I'm obviously a male. I just have more of an affinity for Claire and her storyline and her personality than I do for Leon. It was a challenge for me to write Leon because I'm a huge Resident Evil 4 fan, and I had his voice from that game in my head, and he's much more of a cocky badass in that game.
Much more
And
dominant and assertive, yeah.
yeah, and so having to kind of keep unwinding that in my head and say, no, but this is young Leon. This is first day on the job Leon. This is earnest, naive Leon. This is innocent Leon. And that was challenging. And so I had to work much harder to kind of write Leon's, campaign than I did Claire's, because Claire, I just kind of hooked into her character a little bit earlier on, and it felt more effortless. I also just enjoyed the dynamic of and the challenge of Sherry. I mean, if you remember in the original game, Sherry was more of just kind of like the NPC you have on an extended escort mission.
Oh, she was so annoying. Oh.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, not me. Yeah, she's very annoying. And so my singular goal with Sherry was, I want you to care about her. Like, can I do that? And you've seen, I think, the producers have mentioned it before, but we talked about this early on, was I really wanted to bring that kind of Ripley Newt dynamic, right, to the story, where, Claire goes in with a very singular focus to find her brother, which tells you right away that she has a very strong kind of familial connection. And the fact that you learn she kind of lost her parents and she only has her brother, she immediately then has the capacity to bond with Sherry and to quickly understand what it's like to lose your parents or to be separated from them. And then all of her kind of maternal instincts kick in, but because she's the sister of Chris, she's also got some badass to her as well. So that's what gave me the belief that I could kind of evoke that Ripley Newt dynamic. But in order to make that work, if you go back and watch Aliens, which is a brilliant movie, Newt is not annoying. Newt is helpful in times. And so that was the whole key, was how can we make Sherry someone that you really care about, that actually kind of feels helpful, and that, knowing that they wanted to have that little section where you were going to play as her, you had to really like her so that you felt the jeopardy of what Brian Irons might do to her / you. So long answer to your question, Claire definitely, and that's why for me the definitive playthrough would have been Claire A, Leon B.
I definitely agree with that, strangely, because contrastingly, it's actually the opposite in the original Resident Evil 2. I think most fans would agree, at least, of course, that Leon A and Claire B was definitely the better way to play and had the more interest in. Like, Leon's scenario was definitely more entertaining in the original. But this is the thing, right, is that was kind of unrealistic in a way, because Claire's story is honestly more realistic. Like, Leon is just, as you said, and you even had to remind yourself, he's just a rookie. He's pretty much, to be honest, considering that, honestly, police training obviously doesn't train you for this, he's pretty much just a civilian in a city with a fucking handgun. And Claire, at least, has been taught by her brother what zombies are and BOWs and how to fight them, and so Claire's is actually the more believable story out of the two. And the other thing is, though, are you ready to get into the really difficult questions, the really, really hard ones now?
Sure.
Let's go. What was the most controversial thing that you had to encounter with writing versus the production team in Resident Evil 2?
Well, trying to think of the most. I mean, there's an obvious answer to this that I can give you, and it has to do, but it's not because of the interesting, dramatic, or salacious reasons that you might imagine, but it has to do with Sherry and Claire, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Going back just also though to kind of to give you the runners up, the Brian Irons thing was really hard. That was because I really wanted to make you hate Brian Irons. I really, I was almost using Frank Booth and Blue Velvet, as a model for him in terms of the degree of depravity and intensity I wanted to bring to that character. And in the early drafts of that, I crossed the line.
So you made him an absolute non-empathetic villain in any capacity. You literally want to murder this guy.
Yes, exactly. And so there was some, pushback of, okay, interesting, but can you dial this guy back? So what we ended up settling on was I think the perfect tone, but that there was a little bit of controversy there. The scene in Kendo's gun shop, that was only controversial in that when that scene got shifted around and was no longer kind of like the first touch point for the player when they're in the city, and going into the Kendo's gun shop and getting the shotgun there and all that stuff. When that got moved around and it was just going to be, in Leon's campaign, one of the things we were looking for was, well, okay, we're moving it. Why? And so one of the story ideas that kind of came about was, well, let's give that scene a purpose. Like, let's not just put it in because we have to have a Kendo's gun shop or the fans will be upset, but let's have it have dramatic importance. And so kind of the idea that I had was, let's put it at a place in Leon's campaign that's an inflection point where he's been following around Ada, really because he wants information. He wants answers from her. It's not even so much that he's like in love with her at that point, but he sees her as a source of information. And for Leon, it's like, I can't do my job well until I know what's going on, right? That's a very credible stance. And because she's the only one who seems to have any answers at all, but she's not giving them to him. The idea behind Kendo's gun shop was supposed to be kind of a culmination, an emotional culmination for him, to give him a reason to say, God damn it, talk to me, give me some answers, right? And so that's what Kendo's gun shop was meant to be. And so the controversy kind of came in, okay, well, what can we do there? And I had pitched a number of ideas, and then when I came up with this idea of, well, let's have Kendo have a daughter, and let's do this thing, and let's have him voice essentially what Leon and the player are feeling, which is, you're a cop, you're supposed to know something. Tell me, why are you keeping this from me? And the fact that Ada doesn't say anything is obviously that's true to her character. Why should she? She shouldn't have any sympathy for this guy. She's got a job to do. But it gave Leon, a really interesting position in that scene and a purpose for that scene. And so some of the controversy was just around, like, how can we really do this? Can we really take something that was just a guy that had a couple lines and you got a shotgun from and turn him into an important character? Like, is this the kind of change that fans will love because now Kendo feels more complex and deeper and all this other stuff? Or is it going to be like, no, where's Kendo? Where's the Kendo we love? So there was some controversy around that. But going to kind of, I would have to say, the winner, because it caused the most discussion, and things got, I'm not going to say tense, but there was just a lot of like, well, we don't know, we can't do this, this isn't going to work. It was kind of a simple thing. It was around, I felt it was important that Claire make a specific connection to Sherry, and that she gives her jacket. Now, in the game, like, you'd think like in a movie that would be nothing. It's just like, it's a prop. But in the game, you have to change the model. Like it's not an insignificant thing. And then now both models get changed because now Sherry has a coat and
yeah, you have to like rig the animations and everything around that, etc.
Right. So originally, and I'll share this with you and your audience, the main thing I pitched, which we had to scale back, was that Claire gives it to Sherry and says she got it from her brother and it's good luck. and then it becomes this interesting totem where it's like, you understand, it's like, this is a meaningful thing to Claire. Like, her brother gave this to her, right? This is not some small thing that she got at a thrift store. So for her to give it to Sherry is like this real sign of affection, right? Beyond just caring for her and saying kind words and that kind of thing. So what I wanted to do originally was, when Annette dies, I wanted Sherry to take off the jacket and leave it with her and put it over her, cover her mother with it. And I thought that would have been this like great transference of emotion, right? And but that was too controversial. That was like, well, but we don't want to have to take now that we've already taken the time to put the coat on Sherry and the model, and it just became this really difficult practical circumstance.
Yeah, modeling it for 3 different people.
Right. So I was frustrated by that, because I'm like, no, but that's what I want to happen. Like, that just feels like the culmination, right? And to see like Sherry have the awareness to not just lay the coat on her to keep her warm, but to put it over her face, right? That just like, that makes me think, oh God, that's the poor girl to go through that, but to have the awareness to do that. So when I couldn't do it, I was a bit annoyed, and I kept trying to talk them into it, and they wouldn't. So we ended up doing what's written.
So there was basically a compromise between both parties on the vision that you wanted and what could be done. But I think the more interesting thing here is, and you don't have to elaborate if you don't want to, because this one's controversial, but what did you want the chief to originally truly be? Because you didn't elaborate on that.
Well, I wanted him to be more explicit about, saying something to the effect of, I can't wait to get you up on my embalming table. I mean, not those words, but I wanted him
like
to be...
the original Ari too, though, like very pedophilic and into murder and all sorts of psychopathic behavior, taking the outbreak to his advantage, etc.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we see the mayor's daughter, we see Catherine Warren on his embalming table. So I before that, like, imagine if you're not a fan, like you're playing the game for the first time, and he, as he's taking Sherry away, he's saying, I can't wait to get you up on my table. It's like, what the hell does that mean? And then when you see the girl on the table, it's like, oh God. But anyway, so anything that crossed the line, that was too specific in its threat to Sherry, was shot down. So the best I could kind of sneak in there was, oh, you don't have any manners. We're going to teach you some manners, or what? Well, I don't remember what the line is, but what he says when he's taking her away from the garage,
threatening her that she's going to get punished, etc.
Right, and you can kind of just read into that. What's he going to, like, slap her hand? Like, you don't know. I mean, he seems like a total asshole, but it's not some vague, slightly sadistic, or even, God forbid, sexual threat. It's just more of like a stern guy who's gonna, punish her in some way, but it's not clear.
Yeah, because that's one of the biggest changes from the original Resident Evil. We more get his pervertedness, if you would, from the taxidermy reports. Because in the original Resident Evil, there was like the nude painting that was, if I remember, there was a woman hanging that was nude or something like that, and his secretary was like, "Oh, that's really creepy. I saw him looking at that with some really lusty eyes." And that made me feel really uncomfortable. Some kind of documentation like that I remember reading along those lines. And all of that got removed, but the implications are still there. They're still very much there. I'm glad you managed to sneak them in, by the way.
Well, to be honest, this is where, collaboration is everything, because, a writer's instincts are not always correct. There were things that I wanted to do. I wanted to push further here and there, or they wanted me to go further in certain places. And at the end of the day, I did what they wanted in every case, and I trusted their vision. and they had a very clear and strong vision. The top producers and designers, and so to their credit, like the game that you experience is their vision. I contributed to it, but it's clearly their vision, and they deserve the lion's share of the credit because they're the ones who took the biggest risk, knowing like this is their product, right? I was just an employee, but this is their product and their franchise, and they had a very clear vision that they made sure that they executed on all fronts.
So for one of the final questions, which is again very controversial, and I do apologize about this, by the way. I hate asking controversial questions. I really do.
No, but that's what all your fans want you to ask.
Yeah, so and that's what all that even you as a fan is something you should be interested in. So what is with the inconsistencies with Leon A and Claire A's finales in the nest?
Yes. Well,
you knew this was going to be asked, right? It had to be asked somewhere.
But I would have asked it for you as a fan. Again, and let me just state that I wish I had a more kind of clear, kind of definitive answer for you. But here's what I can say. When the game was presented to me, when we shifted from, like I said, that first 6 months where we were going to just do like literally a remaster, it was very much the zapping system. We were going to do the exact game that came out in 1998, really. When we made the shift to, to the new way, to the way that they came out, the kind of the reimagining, they were very specific in saying, we're not doing the zapping system anymore. We're doing 2 campaigns, and both of them in their own way are canon, meaning that at the end of the day, canon is, well, Annette dies in the facility, William Birkin and G dies in the whole facility, and Ada does not. And Sherry, Claire, and Leon all escape. That's the canon, right? Like that is what nothing gets changed. How all of those events play out, becomes determined by, well, which one do you play through first? And if you consider that to be canon, then, I was the one that killed Annette, or Annette, sacrificed herself to save Sherry, or so I guess my point is that they had this idea that they were going to have 2 kind of campaigns that told the story from these differing points of view, and between the 2 you would kind of understand what happened here. There was always going to be this kind of weird inconsistency and overlap, particularly with regards to Annette. It was discussed at one point because I remember being confused, like saying, wait a minute, but I thought Annette does that. And it's like, okay, well, don't worry about it because we're not doing the zapping system. These 2 things don't have to completely interlock. They're more kind of like one is a slightly alternate version of the other. And that was really, at that point I was like, oh, okay. I had enough information to say, okay, well, I'm not going to worry about it. It was always a little difficult for me to kind of, just from a text standpoint, understand how all of this would fit together. And that goes back to what I was saying before about just trusting them that they had a vision. And, now that I've seen it and how it all plays out, I can see where fans kind of go, wait a minute, but that doesn't jibe. What I will say that's been kind of interesting is reading a number of reviews and watching playthroughs. The people who bump up against it the most are like fans of Resident Evil, and specifically fans of RE2, like that know what was supposed to happen in their minds. People that are playing it for the first time, like they never played Resident Evil 2, or they never played a Resident Evil game really before. It doesn't seem to bother them as much. They just kind of attribute it to it's just an alternate version of the story. So I'm not making an excuse. I'm just saying that I think it was just to sum it up. It was one of those things that they wanted to do something different, And when it came to the point of trying to figure out how these two things would merge together seamlessly, I think they just said, let's not worry about it. We want to make sure that each one of the campaigns is a really cool story. And I think that, to your point, you really liked that scene where Annette sacrificed herself with Sherry. And we really felt like it was important that Annette be the one who stops the G virus by shooting Ada. And because what else would happen in that scene? Like, so once you kind of say, well, that's how we want these two kind of campaigns to end, and this character arc of Annette to end in very different ways, that she's kind of heroic in slightly different versions of story, then it became a thing of, well, let's just keep them both. So I'm sure not a completely satisfying answer, but at least fans can understand kind of some of the thought process that went in to why it came out the way it did.
Well, I'll just say, first off, honestly, thank you very much for that very elaborate answer, to be honest, because I understand that there's a lot of restrictions that you're under behind what you can say, etc. And nobody has actually officially talked about this specific subject or context before, so you're basically the first source of information for it. So I'm sure even if you feel it's a disappointing answer, like it's the most elaborate answer we have yet so far, so I'm sure everyone's going to be thankful over that. But to further go on about some of the inconsistencies, because I do want to address controversies, and by the way, I just want to say to everybody out there, not just to you, but to everybody out there, by the way, I do actually rate this game an 9 out of 10. Honestly, from my own perspective, it is pretty much impossible to get a 10 out of 10. There's no way to create a perfect game. If you rate a game a 10 out of 10, it just means that you have a really close heart to the game. Like, for example, if you really appreciate Metal Gear Solid 1 or something, but there is no such thing as a truly perfect piece of art or work. There is no such thing. So I think a 9 is, or 9.5 is the closest you can get to be classified as perfect, if you would. There's no such thing as a 10 out of 10, just in my opinion anyway. But my point is, anyway, carrying on, is that I just want to say that even with these inconsistencies, I still rate the game very highly, and I do agree with a lot of your points. But to carry on with the controversies as well, so the second campaigns, they kind of seem like a Madhouse mode from Resident Evil 7 rather than B scenarios without really being canon. They're like what-if scenarios. Do you agree with that, or did they have any storytelling behind them?
That's a whole area of the game that I frankly was just not involved in. Meaning, my job was to write the two main campaigns, and how that kind of set up or configured for kind of the second runs or the B campaign. Like, I did write some dialogue to differentiate certain things here and there, but it just that was all, again, part of that trust thing where there was a point at which, when everything was still on paper, the level of complexity of how all of this fit together was just not, frankly, totally clear to me. So they would send me chunks of something and then say, hey, this scene has to be told from a slightly different point of view, and you need to do it this way, and then I'd write the dialogue for it. And I also will admit that I haven't played through the game other than just going, Claire A and Leon B. I haven't gone back and kind of done the deeper run. So I don't have an actual opinion about it, and I really don't have any insight into what they were trying to accomplish or why.
Yeah, from my perspective, because I've got a lot of hours into the game, by the way, they just kind of feel like speedrun modes, to be honest, and that's what most of the fans agree with. There's no real story mode to it, to be honest. It is actually really based around speedrunning the entire way it works. So if anyone played Resident Evil 7, it will very much remind you of the Madhouse mode, where you just had to kind of like run through, you're getting barraged by more enemies than should really be in any area. You get access to items earlier than you should do, etc. Blah blah blah. And puzzles are also changed in a very slight way as well. But obviously that has nothing to do with the storyline anyway. It still is an interesting mode. Something that I do want to elaborate on, because we talked about this before, though, is that you did have no involvement in the Ghost Survivors DLC, so that can be summarized to basically what if scenarios, essentially, from what I've read.
Yeah, no, I in fact, I knew that they were going to do DLC, but I was not involved in any way, shape, or form in it, and it was a complete surprise to me what they did, just in the way that all the rest of us fans were surprised.
Yeah, because I honestly prefer your version of the Kendo ambiguity, and you never know what really happened, and to be blunt, did he kill his child and just shoot her on the spot to prevent zombification, or did he commit suicide and let his child zombify? That ambiguity was actually beautiful, and so I'll just take the DLC as a what if, rather than the real canon, because I actually prefer this, and this leads into the next controversial question that many fans are going to be interested in. And this is one that I've been asked a lot about, by the way.
Okay.
Did you pre-plan for Remake 3 with the writing of Remake 2 in any way, shape, or form? Or do you know if the game development team in any context did?
Ooh, wow, that is highly controversial. And that is absolutely a question I cannot answer.
That in itself is almost an answer, to be honest, if we think about it.
You can take it that way, but what I'm telling you is I cannot answer that question.
I appreciate that, but I'm sure you know many fans were very, very curious with how many cues and indications there were in the game that there were ties in and other things to Resident Evil 3 already. So some of the holes in the wall, for example.
I'm sure fans are dying to know. And I don't know. I mean, I would say it's wait and see.
So yeah, that's why the fans are now going to be dying when they hear this.
Well, I don't mean to kill fans, but yeah, that's my stance is I cannot answer that question.
So before we end the interview, as a fan yourself, is there anything you would actually want to say without any questions to the fans of the entire franchise, as a writer as well now for the franchise, to everybody?
I think this would be a great opportunity to mostly just express my sincere gratitude to the fans for how they've embraced the game. And, my one regret is that I worked on this game because then I didn't have the chance to experience it like everyone else, where I, just sat around and waited until that, midnight and the download was available and I played through it and lost sleep and, all the other stuff. Because I knew too much. I mean, I had played it and I didn't get to have that experience. And so I'm incredibly, I'm incredibly grateful to Capcom for giving me that experience. I'm also very envious of fans that have had that experience. But specifically, I just want to say thank you to all the fans, yourself included, who have put so much content online, whether it's analysis of the game, whether it's playthroughs of the game, whether it's reaction videos. It's allowed me, all of that content has allowed me, as this poor deprived fan who never got to experience the game like everyone else, to cobble together this experience where I'm realizing what the game is and what it felt like through everyone else. So it's just been great. I love the creativity of the internet. I mean, it's just fantastic. And it's specifically of this fan base. There's so much passion. Seeing some of the memes that have arisen, seeing the crazy kind of mods that have popped up, the fan art, it's astounding, and it's all of that is what makes the game feel successful. Forget about the reviews and the sales figures and whatnot. That's just data. It's that emotional outpouring that the fans have had, and even 2 weeks plus later, people are still engaging with the game and still experiencing it, and it's just a great feeling.
Oh, it's going to go on much further than that as well, with all the elaborate hints and implications and all of the other things that you've put in the game. There's going to be many, many fan theories, conspiracies, and all sorts coming for another 6 to 12 months at least.
Well, good. That's it's great to hear that.
But that was a really humble answer, to be honest, and I'm sure many fans will really appreciate the actual opinion you've put forth there. That you're disappointed, honestly, as a writer, that you had to be involved in the project in a very odd way due to the fact that you couldn't go in blind, which is what many fans obviously appreciate in any game. And I can appreciate that, to be honest. I do understand where you're coming from, because you didn't get the surprises, you didn't get to feel the shock and emotions, etc., because you'd ruled them out yourself with a predetermined imperative. But I just think, in a way, you've just kind of bolstered Capcom's reputation very heavily, because it basically proves at this point that they are changing the direction, because I think any true RE fan can admit at RE5 to RE6 things went a little bit awry, and during RE7 to RE2 it looked like they'd reshaped their teams and started to get the original vibe back into their games.
Yep, I totally agree.
And yeah, literally hiring an original OG RE2 fan as a writer is one of the biggest compliments to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've worked on some really cool projects in my days, and this is probably one of the best experiences of my life, working on this project, feeling the incredible pressure of being a fan and knowing how fans would just absolutely crucify me if I ruined this. But at the same time, knowing that if I somehow pulled it off, it would restore not just fans' trust in remakes, but it would also bring a whole new kind of wave of fans to Resident Evil and to this game in particular. And to think that some new fans might go back and play the original.
But I was just saying, as a whole, honestly, even Capcom's reputation was riding on your writing. That sounds really repetitive, but yeah, riding on your writing. And you actually have really, really bolstered Capcom's reputation at this point and reaffirmed all the fans' faith in the franchise as a whole, not just new ones, but old ones that felt fearful that they were still going to go in this action direction. And that's absolutely great. So, as the last question I'm going to ask you, which is just something that's not related to Resident Evil 2, interestingly enough, because I think we've covered enough of that, but honestly, I just want to talk about what are all your past projects in a TLDR, of course, and which are the most interesting ones, and what have you had the most fun with?
Oof! Wow, there's a lot. I'm gonna have to do kind of like the super highlight version of this.
Yeah, that's what I said.
think,
TLDR for a reason. I know it's gonna be a big list.
Right, but I will say that just keeping it focused on games, because that'll be the easiest. The work on the first game that I did was on Command and Conquer 3, and I was brought into that project in EA to help kind of reboot the entire Command and Conquer franchise, and ended up writing a ton of lore around Command and Conquer in order to build out what was going to be this really groundbreaking FPS called Tiberium. Ultimately, that game never went anywhere because they couldn't get the engine to support the vision of the game, and I ended up taking all of that lore and actually writing the third installment of the trilogy, Command and Conquer 3: Tiberium Wars. And having been a huge fan of Command and Conquer up until then.
I just want to say I played the hell out of Tiberium Wars, by the way.
Oh, okay.
All hail the GDI.
Yeah, exactly. So that was just like, again, it was a huge kind of dream come true because I was a huge fan of Command and Conquer, and so to kind of write that game was big, and then to go from that, and I did some other stuff along the way, but to go from that to working on Halo 4, Halo was a hugely impactful game for me. The first Halo and the second Halo, oh my God. So to get to work on Halo 4 was, again, a kind of a dream come true. And then to go from that, again, with a few other games in between, to Resident Evil 2, like one of my top, 5-10 games of all time, and to get to rewrite it. I just, I feel like I'm incredibly fortunate, and I've worked on Star Trek and Star Wars and just a whole bunch of other big franchises, but those three big game experiences for me, as they say, I could quit tomorrow and I would feel like I've done everything I wanted and more. So I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about in terms of my career. I will say, just as a tease, it looks like I'm going to be working on another big game franchise. That's, again, another one of my favorites.
What a tease! What a tease!
Yeah. But yeah, so it's really a privilege to be in that position and to have these incredible opportunities. Mostly just because I'm such a gamer myself. To go kind of behind the scenes and work on these big franchises that meant something to me first as a gamer. It's really surreal. It's kind of hard to describe.
If I can actually ask you one final question, because actually, you know what, a lot of fans would actually be interested in this, because a lot of people, obviously, you obviously have given the implications of yourself that you feel very humble and honoured at the opportunities you've had. What would you suggest to people if they actually want to get into the gaming industry in writing or even any other aspect? What would you suggest to them, honestly, in true advice?
True advice. Having been on the inside at a lot of game companies, I will say it's a very steep hill to climb. It's a very insular business. It's hard to break into. But all that being said, I will say this, that the biggest fans, the ones that take the time to create mods, to create new extensions, to do things that get the attention of the game communities, those things are all seen by the people on the inside, and there are stories of those people getting pulled up and in to the game companies and becoming part of those teams. So I think the internet is the way in for everybody. It's if you really care and you want to make a good impression, create some content that's related to or inspired by or an extension of the things you love the most. And if the fan communities around those games validate it with tons of views and love, it will get noticed.
So just take this, guys, from an original Resident Evil fan that obviously started out like absolutely the rest of us, just as a young individual who was playing the horror games just for the thrill of it, for wanting to experience the storyline, kill some zombies, go through an elaborate mansion, do some puzzles, and then carry on to Resident Evil 2. Your best bet is to honestly just carry on being a passionate fan and to contribute to the communities as much as you can. Literally, that is coming from a writer that got a job at Capcom for Resident Evil 2's reimagining or remake, whichever one you want to call it, is to just contribute to the community and be positive. That's the best advice then. And honestly, I actually have seen stories, by the way, that do go with what you say. For example, I've seen Skyrim modders that actually got jobs at Bethesda due to the fact that their modding and coding capability was so highly embellished. It was incredible to the point they were like outdoing the actual developers, that they got jobs.
Yep, it does happen. It is possible, and you just have to, look. You have to believe, and it sounds like such a cliche, but you have to believe to the point that your belief is unwavering, and you just never stop creating amazing content. And if that's truly what you love, then you would be doing it anyway, regardless of what your hope and expectation is. So I would say, like, anybody who wants it, if you want it bad enough, do everything you possibly can, and lo and behold, you'd be surprised what doors will open for you.
So not just on my behalf, but on the behalf of the entire Resident Evil and even just Capcom community as a whole, I want to just personally really thank you from the bottom of my soul, honestly, for all of this. The amount of information, elaboration, and entire subjects you covered, even controversial ones, has been incredibly informative. And honestly, I think everybody is really going to appreciate all of this information. And even you as a fan probably can appreciate by, because as a writer, you're almost like an actor, actually. You can roleplay out of your own mentality, and you can understand from the fans' perspective. The information you just provided is absolutely incredible. I just really want to thank you for absolutely all of that. Not, like I said, just from myself, but for the entire fan base, because I know they will really, really love all of this. You've done this for absolutely no self-profit or anything. I want to elaborate that for everybody, by the way. This was completely for no self-profit or anything, just literally to provide the fan base with more passionate information and to just give everybody a bigger picture of the story.
Listen, thank you for having me on your channel. It's been really fun to talk about all of this with you, and I'm really excited to just keep watching people play the game online, read about it, and see whatever crazy, cool, creative content people produce.
Yeah, and I'll leave a link to the Twitter for Brent, by the way, in the description if anyone wants to follow him. He apparently is including some secret projects according to his bio, so keep up to date on those if you want to see what eventually comes out. And yeah, just we'll see what happens from now on. It could be Resident Evil related, it could be anything else. We'll just have to wait to find out. But thank you very, very much, and I just hope you have a beautiful time for now, and everybody really does appreciate this.
Great. Well, thanks again, and you take care of yourself.